And you probably didn't know this unless you were here last night, but this last week, Brother Keith and I found ourselves in the fellowship hall sucking up water. And I've been trying to find a way to kind of lead into this for weeks, even though I've already had kind of an agenda laid out for me in Matthew chapter 5. And there we are, we're mopping the floor up. We're sucking this water out. The pipes have burst. We just got a text from our daughter in Mississippi. Their church is having the same problem, by the way, you know. And the Lord said, well, right here it is. This is your lead-in to how you're going to introduce this topic. I'm like, now I'm having this conversation. Keith's sucking water, and I'm mopping the floor. He has no idea this is going on. And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess that would work. And then he gave me this riddle. Riddle me this, riddle me that. What does the old building, these old bones, and the Beatitudes have in common? Well, last night on the way out, Jeff said, well, they're old. And I thought, well, that's it. Yeah, okay, you're right. You know, the Beatitudes are relatively old. They weren't when Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount, but yeah, they're old. These pipes in this old building are old, and these bones in this old body are getting older. And so what do they all have in common? Here is the sermon title for the next several weeks: climate change. Yeah, climate change. You see, these old pipes, if it gets cold enough, now we thought we had the heat on. In fact, we did. But there's a repeating pattern here. And I think we're all too familiar with it. That's what I kind of was teasing with Keith. I said, this is an awful slow way to remodel a church. And we were trying to find out where the damage was done and looking at it from that vantage point. But when these old pipes get cold enough, they burst. That's just the way it is. That's the way it's going to be. And we're not left with a whole lot of solutions, although I was given one last night. We can go around and put basically heat lamps on the pipes. Or we can drain the water out and turn the water off, and then maybe they won't bust. But we're going to have this reoccurring problem because these pipes are old and they are affected by climate change, temperature. These old bones, now you don't have to qualify yourself. I think Jaden was with us last night, and I said something about wisdom trumps youth, and he looked at me kind of strange, and he said, I don't think so. And I said, you're just a kid. And he goes, I know, but I beat you. We're playing some crazy game where you throw an avocado at people. Now, I clocked Ivy right upside the head, I guess, with an avocado. Yeah, I mean, you know, temperature change affects these old bones. It affects this old building. And that's pretty much where I draw the line. The Beatitudes are about climate change. Now, there's a lot that can be said about climate change. Whether it even exists is up. I think I probably need Brother Logan to step in right here. But, you know, for all the ranting and raving about climate change, you know, it seems to me it was awful cold last week before last. And I looked at some of since we've been keeping records, and some of these records for climate, as far as cold and heat, they go way back, and some don't. You remember a couple of winters ago? That was a tough one, wasn't it? It's hard for me to necessarily just buy all the goods that they're trying to cram down my throat. Now, here's the thing. When I look at a new year, it's easy for me to want to get up and supercharge you. Those were great songs, by the way, because I think all of us have felt fear. We've all felt that sometimes we go through these storms and the things that life throws our way, and we don't handle them real well. And we're grateful for the Lord to be there in the midst of those storms. Sometimes we don't recognize him as fast as we should, but he's there. So I'm grateful for that. So I thought, I'll just get up and just challenge them, Lord. And the Lord was just saying, no, you're not going to be able to do that. I said, well, why not? This is God and me having a conversation. Well, because you've got something that you have to do that will challenge them. You just have to be careful on how you present it because you could really tick them off. I'm like, thanks a lot. So I got to thinking, what do we need? Do we need a resolution? Now, I'm not going to say, if I were to ask you, have you made a New Year's resolution? Probably every year we make one or two of those things, and sometimes, we're able to see them through a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, but most of the time we find ourselves falling back into a what? Pattern. It's human nature. It's our nature. Now, I've tried to rid my mind of any particulars, and so sometimes I wonder there's not a whole lot going on up there anyway, but I've tried to do that, but you won't. When I begin to say certain things, you're going to try to put a face with it. Don't do that. I wish you wouldn't. I can't help you not to, but you probably will. And so what I want to do is I'm going to tell you that while I'm not necessarily against resolutions, that's not what I'm doing. I look at the world and I see what's going on from the Ukraine to our borders south of us. And you might say, well, you could make a case for revolution. I mean, we might not have resolution, but we might need revolution. And this is a political comment. You don't have to comment after me. You can see me later. But I kind of like what the governor is doing myself. I think to date he has sent 8,100 immigrants to Washington, D.C. I kind of like that. Now, that's just me, okay. We live in a world that is upside down. I am watching on one of these night shift things I'm doing. I'm watching the tough channel, the grit channel. The old westerns, where men were men and women were women, and I'm in. This is like 3:30 in the morning, and then two guys get on there and they're kissing each other, and they're cramming this thing down my throat on the grit channel. They're doing this, no less, and I'm just about to come unglued. The guy that's asleep next to me, I wake him up. Did you see that? Well, no. Well, let me tell you what it was. You might make a case for revolution. But that's not what we need. What we need, we have. It's revelation. We need a revelation from God. And I'm going to try to do that in the next few minutes. And I've asked the Lord to give me the words and to give me the approach that I can take so that you'll get the point without being totally ticked off. When I was a revitalization pastor, it was easy, not easy, that's not the right word. It was easier for me to look at the church objectively. I could come in and I could say, okay, this is their strength and this is their weakness, and this is what we'll need to do to shore this thing up, and we'll try to reinforce some of those strengths, and we'll get some crowds, and we'll do some things, and they'll begin to recognize perception is everything, and get on the right track, and we did that, and I was excited, and we invested ourselves into young people that are no longer here, and then I did something that I haven't regretted, but I haven't been able to step back objectively because I became your pastor. Now your problem is my problem. It's our problem. Do you see that? I can no longer just step back and go, well, let's just do this and we'll do that. I'm not saying that it's not good to evaluate, because it is. That's what I'm doing. But what it's done is it's revealed some things. And it revealed this to me. I'm slow. It revealed this to me as the scriptures revealed it to me. Our church is in a pattern. It has been in a pattern for years. I don't know about you, but I'm a little tired of investing myself into young people that go off and get married and they never darken the door of the church again. That's a pattern. There are people that come for a while and then they're gone and you don't see them again. That's a pattern. And the problem is we all have patterns. I have patterns. Some of our patterns are good. I have a passion for the Word of God. And I try to bring that every week. I don't care how many or how few we are. That's a God thing. That's a good thing. That's a good pattern. I told you months ago, you don't have to prove yourself to me. But my fear is that in saying that, I haven't really challenged you enough. You say, well, why are you challenging us? Because you're the ones that are responsible. I can't talk to somebody that's not here. That's why it might behoove us all to get on the phone to those that consider themselves to be part of Emmanuel Baptist Church and say, you need to hear this one. So how do I go about making you aware of a pattern? I don't think this is a hard sell. I don't. People revert to the things that make them comfortable. Now I need to have a wall or a partition so that I could speak like the Wizard of Oz behind a curtain, and you pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But there are things in your life that are a pattern. And there are things in my life that is a pattern. Some of those things are good. Some of those things are not good. And I have to be able to break those patterns. So what I'm asking you to do, I'm asking myself to do. I'm going to ask myself in the next 2 weeks especially, and I've already done this, but I'm going to, I'm made more aware of it, it seems like every day. There are patterns that have to be changed, and we're the only ones that can change it. So in order to do that, what do we need? Well, do we need a resolution? No. We may be resolute, but we don't need a resolution. Do we need a revolution? Do we need, Power to the People, a 60s theme going on here? Do we need something that, incites people to riot? No. And I'm saying that all because in the backdrop of Matthew chapter 5, that's exactly what was going on. I didn't have to go any farther than where I was to see a pattern. We need the revelation of God to stir us enough to change us, to change our patterns. Now, I can only speak for myself, and so that's what I'm going to try to do. And if you sit there and going, yeah, you need to just straighten up, well, then you missed the whole point. The whole point is Jesus was in a group surrounded by a group of people that thought they had it all together. I mean, there were Pharisees, and they were the ones that made the law, and there were the scribes, and they were the ones that wrote the law down, and then there were the people, some of which were Sadducees, and some were Essenes, and they were very revolutionary in that they were zealots. I heard the definition of a zealot this last week. A zealot is someone that uses the cause to riot. We got a lot of those people around this country. They use any and everything to plot, pillage, and plunder. But that's called a zealot, and they missed the whole point. There were people that sat on that hillside listening to Jesus that were revolutionary. They were zealots. They thought that the Messiah ought to be a revolutionary figure. I often wonder where I would have been on that hillside. And I'm going to confess to you, I would have probably been on the front row. I want to hear what he's got to say. But that's not truly, if I'm honest, that's not truly my motive. Because in verse 20, Jesus and everything that follows in the Sermon on the Mount, it hinges on verse 20. Unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you don't have a case for heaven. Now, he took 12 verses to kind of outline what the characteristics of a true believer should look like. That's why they're called the Beatitudes. These are the attitudes that are in believers, at least they should be. They shouldn't be too hard to find. Some of them kind of get tucked away every once in a while, and we have to bring them, or actually God brings them to light, and we begin to recognize them again in our lives. But the fact of the matter is, if true happiness is being a believer, then we ought to be the happiest people on the face of the earth, but we're not. Now, I'm always skeptical of a guy that's always smiling. You ever been around a guy like that? He's always smiling. I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, what are you up to? Okay, so that's not what I'm talking about. So Jesus is surrounded by all kinds of people. And they had established a pattern. You see, the zealot was there because he thought Jesus was going to be this Messiah that was going to be revolutionary. The disciples were there because who else are they going to follow? You know, these guys, when they finally got on board, they made a name for themselves, and more importantly, they made a name for God. But initially, they were fishermen and tax collectors, and there was a doctor there. But these were men of varied vocations and personalities, and I think that he chose them like that on purpose, because we are a church of diversity. And no matter how many or few we'll ever have, we are going to be diverse. There are going to be different vocations. There are going to be different things that appeal to us. Some things won't appeal to us. And so what I'm trying to say is I want you in the next couple of weeks to ask God, what patterns in my life are not healthy? They're not good for me. They're not good for my family. And they're not good for this church. Now you see where I'm going with this. Now, if you're like me, and you're at the front of the line and you're sitting on a rock and Jesus is talking and he says that verse number 20, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. In my heart, I don't know that I have the nerve or the courage to stand up and do it, but I'm going, cha-ching. Man, yeah, give it to them, Jesus. The scribes and the Pharisees, hit them right where it hurts. And because they spoke Aramaic, and there weren't many of them that were schooled in Hebrew, the Pharisees had taken advantage of that. And they had made up all of these laws. And so what hinges on the rest of this Sermon on the Mount, it's not resolution. It's not a revolution. It's revelation. You're stuck in a pattern, and I'm about to shake your tree so much so that you're going to either do one of two things. You're going to fish or cut bait. You're going to fish or cut bait. So the revelation brings me right where I need to be. They are all similar, this building, this body, and these Beatitudes, because they are affected by climate change. Not the kind you probably are thinking of. The building and these old bones are affected by the temperature. But the Beatitudes, they're affected by a climate change that we call temperament. We do what we do because we are creatures of habit. And there are some things that we have gotten stuck in, and I have now been able to see it. And I, for one, am going, enough's enough. I've got to do something to shake my tree, to shake their tree, to help them to understand that they are the only ones responsible for their church, nobody else. If I say this, this is where you could get mad at me. If all you're waiting for is the last nail to be driven in the coffin, give her to me and I'll bring the hammer, if that's what you want. But I don't think that's what you want. I know it's not what I want. If all we're doing is hanging around for the last nail to fall, that's pretty sorry. And I don't want to be a part of that. And I don't think you do either. The problem is when we have to stand up and take ownership of that. Ow! That hurts. I can't look at you anymore like a revitalization pastor and go, well, here's your problem. No, I have to look at you and me both and go, here's our problem. We've fallen into some patterns that are not healthy. And so I'm going to use revelation to take care of that. I'm not going to go where I'm not wanted. So I'm going to leave most of this up for you to figure out. because I got to be figuring out my own stuff. I got my own patterns to deal with. I got things that I do that I don't like, and I don't think he likes them either. And once again, that's where Jesus was. They had fallen into this pattern for hundreds of years, as just depending on the Pharisee and the scribe, the rabbi, to tell them how to think, what to believe. And so I probably would be just like some of the disciples sitting on the front row, and Jesus, he preaches verse 20, and I'm like, cha-ching, yeah, right, that's great, baby, come on. Christy showed me a video last night. It was a little sacrilegious, but that's okay. Do you know that Jesus cannot do what do you call that a cannonball? It's a video of some guy dressed up like Jesus, and he tries to do a cannonball in a pool, and he hits and he's flat because Jesus walks on water. Okay. Think about it, you'll get it. Jesus is saying, look, I'm going to give you 6 object lessons. If you can't I told you this was going to get a little dicey. If you can't get it after 6 object lessons, you're probably not going to get it. And the first one we probably all would relate to, just as the Pharisee and the scribe related to it. In verse 21, you've heard it said of them I'm going back a little bit. You've heard it said of old times, those that thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. They'd fallen into a pattern. Since I've never killed anybody, I'm pretty spiritual. And then they went off on this tirade, and they made up all these other rules, these do's and don'ts, and the common guy that can't read Hebrew, he's listening to all these things, and he's probably thinking, well, I can't do all that. And so I'm asking you to think about a question that I asked you about a couple of weeks ago. Which is more difficult, for you to understand that grace raises the bar, and by the same bar that grace raises it, grace also reconciles us to God, because the standard is not the rabbi's court. It's not even the court of public opinion. It's God's court. And that's different. In that court, these men would stand, and they would be seen of people. They wanted to be seen, and they would stand in public on the square, on the corner, and they would fast, and they would make their faces to be white ash, and so that people would go, what's wrong with you? You're not feeling very well? I'm fasting. Or they would make their alms known before men, and the offering plate would be passed, and they would throw in their alms so that people could see what they were giving. Or they would pray publicly. And I mean, their prayers were lengthy and they were long. And there were some people that were taken in by it, and they went, wow, they must really be deep. Yeah, they're deep. They're deep in their own self-righteousness. That's how deep they are. So Jesus comes right out of the gate with an illustration. Now, I read on. If you did anything, you probably read on. And you know this is getting kind of, I don't know. We're going to talk about adultery, and I'll try to be careful and be tactful and diplomatic, but I mean, we're talking about adultery and fornication and proper giving, and all of it has to do with a pattern that has been set. And Jesus is going to break that pattern. You say, you've heard it said, that thou shalt not kill. But I say, Jesus is grace. You heard that week before last. In the beginning was the Word. In fact, in Bible study, you're in the book of John. In the beginning was the Word. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld that truth, full of grace and truth and glory, the glory of God manifested in the flesh. That's who Jesus is. Jesus is grace, God's riches at Christ's expense. What does grace say? I really don't care what you say, and you really shouldn't care what I say, but we all ought to care what Jesus says about that. And so I want to know what Jesus says about it. So there are 3 things, and this will get you going. It'll kind of jumpstart you into thinking. I've given you a lot to think about already. Some of you will go out of here going, well, I ain't changing the way I act. That's the problem. I'm not changing my habit or my pattern just because the church needs it. And there you go. And there you have it. And people that you see frequently and then all of a sudden you don't see them for a year, that's a pattern. It's a pattern that people fall into. And they need somebody that cares enough about them to go, you have got some misplaced priorities, brother. They are misplaced. But you can't say that until you get your priorities straightened out. I can't really say that because then I start meddling. And then everybody gets mad. But what I will say is in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to stir the pot up enough that if you're here and if you've got half a brain and you're listening and you have a heart that's open to what God's saying, you're going to go, oh my. I have developed some of those same patterns that the Pharisees had developed. I'm not as bad as that guy. I'm certainly better than so-and-so. And you might even, I hate to think of it, but you might even have family. And some of those family members, they don't darken the doors of this church because of you. And that's a fact. You're going to have to straighten that out. I can't straighten that out for you. And I don't know what I'm talking about because I don't know exactly what that involves. But I know what it means for me. I know what it means for the church. I know what it means for me as far as how I have to deal with my patterns. And I get into patterns. I'm into one right now. I've made it easy for you not to come to church. I've said, and I haven't talked to my wife about this, I have said, you know, if I give them too much, it's going to burn them out. You can't burn somebody out that don't even have a flame. There's no spark. So there will be some changes, not for change's sake, but so that you recognize He is going to challenge us. He is going to expect more out of us. He is. We should. Why don't we? It has to happen. Or just hand me the 6 penny now. And somebody else I'll hand the hammer to. And that's what Jesus is doing by revelation. Oh, you think that you're not a killer, a murderer? I read this week about a teacher in the northeastern part of the United States. She's up for Teacher of the Year. A great teacher, teaching 13 and 14-year-olds. What would that be? 8th graders, freshmen? Somewhere like that. Well, she had a student, and she's known for her caring for her students. She had a student, a 14-year-old boy that was not doing very well in math. So she decided that he's going to need to be tutored. So she asks him to stay after school on certain days, and they'll kind of work through these math problems, and we'll get his math scores back up. So he shows up to be tutored. He robs her, rapes her, and kills her with a box cutter. He takes her body and puts it in a janitorial garbage bag. He then stuffs her body into a trash can. He rolls that trash can outside, and apparently in a wooded area, rolls the trash can into a wooded area and covers it up with leaves. Takes her credit card and goes to the movies. Well, somebody found the garbage can. Somebody found the body. They traced the credit card, and they arrested a 14-year-old boy. When they got into his room, he had written in his room these words: I hate everybody. Now, you're probably thinking what I'm thinking. That boy has got some serious issues, and he deserves Genesis 9:6, probably. What does that say, by the way? It says that. I don't care if he's a minor or not. That's what he deserves. Numbers chapter 30, 35, verses 30 and 31 says this. There were probably people there that felt, by comparison, I've not killed anybody. I'm not that bad. I've never murdered a soul. Can you believe he did what he did? Can you believe she said what she said? Jesus takes this another step. He says to them, he said, but I say unto you, and I want to pay attention when Grace starts talking, I want to hear what Grace has got to say. I'm probably high-fiving it and cha-chinging it on verse 20 and 21, but then verse 22 happens. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Reka, which is a non-interpreted word, it's not a word in and of itself, it's more of a gesture, shall be in danger of the council. But I say, whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hell fire. We're going to read later on that if your right eye offends thee, pluck it out. If your right hand offends thee, cut it off. Because it's better that you enter into heaven than that you enter into hell with all of your body parts. What Jesus is doing is he's drastically giving an illustration, an object lesson, that it would be better for you. If the pattern that you have set leads you to hell, it would be better for you to pluck your eye out and cut your right hand, which is, by the way, a hand of dominance. That's what it means. And the eye is an eye gate into the soul. And out of the soul repeats or occurs these things. Matthew chapter 15, verse 19. That's what you find in the heart. And we have a world like that. And we compare ourselves to that 14-year-old boy or to that. I read about John Gacy. My goodness gracious. They found 33 bodies in plastic bags buried under this man's house. I mean, there are levels of evil, a demonic possession, I would imagine, that I can only just speculate. And we compare ourselves to that guy. We're like, that's John Gacy. Come on, man. You know, that's a 14-year-old nutcase. Something happened to that kid. That's not what Grace says. See, you're going to get mad. You better get mad at Grace. Don't get mad at me. I didn't say this. I'm just repeating it. If you have anger against your brother, if you have and harbor, and this is what they call nursing a grudge. If you nurse a grudge, I like this up here. I don't care what that preacher says. I'm not, they offended me. I'm not going to them. There's three things you need to understand. It's how we view ourselves, it's how we view God, and it's how we view others. That's exactly what he's dealing with. He's dealing with patterns. People are in a pattern. They habitually do some things. Some of those things are not good. In fact, some of those things prevent us from doing what we need to do because we've fallen into a pattern. And I, for one, I'm a little tired of people going to other churches. In fact, it ticks me off just a little bit that I invest myself into somebody and then they have no more loyalties than to go off somewhere else. You can applaud that if you want to. I don't. But that's even not the issue. The issue is, what am I? What patterns am I involved in that are not conducive for the church to grow, for the Holy Spirit to work? I got to take care of that with me while you're taking care of that with you. Now, you can't take care of what I need to do, and I can't take care of what you need to do, but I can certainly give you a guideline, and that's what we're doing. In these next weeks, I'm going to give you a guideline because it not only affects how you view yourself, but it affects how you view God. In fact, it's so serious, and I don't know, you're probably going to get mad at me for this one, but if you got a grudge against someone and it could be years old, Here's what Jesus says about that. It not only affects your opinion of yourself, but it affects your worship. I want you to take your gift, and I want you to leave it on the altar, and I want you to go because he has got aught against you, and you need to get that thing right with him. Well, what if he won't make it right? Well, then you're out of obligation. You're under there's no other endorsement. No, there's no other obligation. You've done your best. You've done your part. You try to reconcile. They won't be reconciled. But you know that they're still mad at you, and you still try to serve God. Grace says, leave. Now, you got to remember, I did this a couple weeks ago. You got to think Old Testament. You got to think about the tabernacle. You got to think about going from the outer court into the inner court, and you got this animal in your hand. And you're going to give this priest this sacrifice. See, to them, they would get that. We don't get that because that's not how we do things. Jesus is telling them, leave the animal. Leave the animal. That's what he's saying. Leave the animal. If you bring your gift into the altar, therefore remembers thy brother, you don't get off here. It's not about you harboring. It's about they harbor. I can't cut you any slack because grace doesn't cut you any slack. Grace says, go to that person, leave your gift, go to that person. You want to get things right with God, we'll get right with them. If they won't get right with you, there are probably people mad at me that I don't know about. I can't do anything about that. But if I know that and I still continue in the pattern of worship, grace says that's just not going to cut it. You leave your gift and you go and you try to make amends. It stirs the pot. It gets things working. You know, every once in a while I have to take these supplements to try to get things working. The older that I get, the more I find that when I get up in the morning, it takes longer for me to get things working. That's what he's saying. There's a work in progress in a church. And patterns get established. And until those patterns that are unhealthy are broken, there's an old what you always did, you always get what you always got. Well, that's not always a bad thing, but I think you understand what I'm saying. It's a bad thing. There are patterns that are established, and we have to break the trend and the pattern. We've got to go, wait a minute. What is unhealthy? What would God not be pleased with? Now, I don't mean about the person down on the pew or the one that's not here. You let them take care of them. I'm talking about you and me. And yeah, I probably ought to get on the phone and go, you need to hear the message because it sets a tone for the rest of the year. He's going to stir it up. He's going to break the pattern or die trying. So Jesus is saying, leave the gift. Leave the animal because it affects your worship. You can sing all you want till Jesus comes back, but it affects your worship, how you see God. And then, finally, and I'll close with this one. Therefore, then, if you brought your gift and you remember your brother, then you leave your gift there at the altar. You go your way, you reconcile to your brother, and then you come and offer thy gift. Verse 25 and 26, it stumped me because I'm like, well, I thought we covered that already, but we didn't. Because it's the idea of agreeing with an adversary before you get taken to court. Before it goes too far, there are people that I've probably let it go too far with. Now, they don't come to my mind right now, but they probably will when I get in the truck. And what he's saying is you agree with the adversary quickly whilst thou art in the way with him, while you can talk to him or her, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee up to a judge. This thing could get really serious. And they understood that. It's so serious that someone's going to lose and someone's going to win. But I've got in the margin of my Bible, I must have wrote this years ago, everybody loses when it gets that bad. He's saying you need to do that before you're delivered unto a judge who will make a ruling and then deliver you into prison where you will pay every dime and dollar that you owe. You know, if you want to get people's attention, just start talking about money. It works. Verily I say unto thee, thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. He's saying, settle this thing out of court. Now, what did I just do? I gave you a way to break a pattern. How I see myself. What patterns am I involved in right now that are not healthy? I learned that by looking at my relationships with others, it affects my relationship with God. I can pretend that it doesn't, but it does. It also affects the patterns that we set in the church. Because guess what the church is made up of? Relationships. Yeah. Look at the core value. It's not just a cute little bookmark I put back there. There's a value to what we do, and and for the most part, let's cut some slack here. For the most part, there are good relationships in the immediate church that I'm looking at right now. You know, you're not avoiding each other. There's no gossip or slander going on. There's not any of that stuff going on. But what I'm saying is that doesn't mean that it hasn't gone on. And there's a point here where Jesus is saying, look, it affects your worship. I don't care how great the song leader is. I don't care how much passion the preacher's got. It affects your worship. And then it does affect your view of other people and how you see them. So, in conclusion, which is tougher? Grace or the law? Grace. Grace is tougher. Man, we're going to get into some things, and you're going to need you're going to have to get tough, because like I said, I'll be diplomatic and I won't be uncouth or anything like that. But if he said it, I'm going to say it. And okay, and so there are some things here that I'm like, whoa, you mean I got to go there? Lord, I'd really rather not go there. But that's where you went. That's what you did. You used 6 object lessons to try to help someone in that congregation to break a pattern. If you're lost, if you don't know Christ, the best thing that you can do right now is to get saved. There is no grudge. There's no consignment. You can't nurse the grudge. You can't do anything that would keep you out of church. I know a guy a stone's throw from here that won't come to church because he's got a grudge. One of two things is going to happen. Either he'll start throwing rocks back or he'll start coming to church. I'm not going to let him lie, because that's what's happened. He's lying to himself. I don't know how it got started, but I'm going to figure it out. You say, so what you're really saying is you're going to stir the pot. I'm going to stir the pot. We'll see what happens after I make the pot and stir it. But it starts with me. So I want you to do this, okay? Have I really thoroughly got you ticked off yet? I want you to stop right where you are, no matter where your mind's headed. And I want you to ask yourself just this simple question. Lord, what pattern have I fallen into that you're not happy with? That's it. That's it. Now let me help you with something. If you get that far and then you start giving all these reasons why it's okay, you're missing the whole point. It's not okay. It's a pattern. It's unhealthy. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help others. It will affect your worship of God. No matter what you do or say or how you try to justify, it won't help. It's not helping me, and it won't help you. So with our heads bowed and our eyes closed, I'm just going to give you some time to think about that. What pattern, what attitude, pattern have I set that's not healthy, it's not right? You don't want that for me. If I'm honest, I know you don't. Reveal that to me. Lord, I pray that this morning you reveal to your people your absolute love for them, your unconditional love for them. There's nothing that they should fear. There is no grudge that's so deep. There is no offense that is so grand in its gesture that you cannot in some way resolve. Bring your church back together. Help people that Lord, we know you love and we love. Help us to see ourselves first of all and foremost before we look at anybody else. It's the attitude of the heart. And so, Lord, help me to be more concerned with myself than anybody else. And reveal what it is you want me to change. And by your grace, I'll change it. I ask in Jesus' name, amen.